And this meeting is being recorded and will be posted with our past meetings at mopag.net. So you can see about our last 10 or 12 meetings there at mopag.net under videos. Today, we hope to have Jewel Kelly joining us a bit later, candidate for U.S. Senate. And Harvey Ferdman requested that he give us a proposal on organizing advocacy groups in the region, and wanted to get our, well, he wanted to put it before us for our consideration. Our treasurer, Christina Anderson, has decided to go to Europe, so I'm going to give the treasurer report today, which is, as of August 2nd, we have $822.92. And that includes 2 new deposits from Susan Jesse and Joe Cummings of $55. Some announcements. The Missouri 2nd Election Committee and Missouri 2nd District for Change organization are hosting a picnic next Saturday, 14 August at 11 a.m. in Love Park, which is just off Manchester, just west of 270. And this is just a come and let out your frustrations and network and have a good time with people. I think these events are, I've come to see them as more important than I used to in terms of people getting together and getting emotional support and cheering each other on and learning new things about how to proceed.
Where is the meeting again?
Yeah, that's going to be next Saturday, 14th of August at 11 a.m. in Love Park.
Oh, Love, okay.
Love Park, which is just off Manchester, just west of 270.
I have 2239 Mason Lane.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
It's behind Munganess Lexus.
Okay, the St. Louis County Central Committee is holding their annual gala tonight, which is their major fundraising event. That's at the Communication Workers Hall. Corey Bush is the speaker, although there seemed to be some question about whether or not she would actually be able to show.
She hasn't responded.
No. I have posted in the chat a 30-minute interview with Dr. Topol of the Scripps Institute. It is the best I've seen on our current situation with COVID Delta variant, and answered a lot of the questions I've had about Delta. I really recommend it. I mean, I think it's awesome. It's really, yeah, it's that good. If anyone is interested, I could just leave it on after our meeting. It's on Instagram. And again, the link's there in the chat. Other announcements that people might have, I think we'll save general discussion for the end of our meeting on other topics, but were there any other announcements?
Well, I have the Dems in the Park thing that I don't know who's sponsoring on the 20.
That's my group, and we canceled that.
You canceled it?
Yeah, that's the
on the 29th.
Yeah, that's the combination of Creve Coeur Democratic Township Club and Maryland Heights Township Democratic Club, and we've decided with COVID concerns we're postponing it.
Okay.
Any other, Susan?
If no one else has seen, or if you have, last night on Bill Maher, he had Ben Singer and Malcolm Nance debating critical race theory. I recommend if you would like some insight into that subject from two very articulate and diametrically opposed people on the subject, that you get a hold of that on YouTube. Bill Maher last night.
And that was Bill Maher, right?
Bill Maher, yeah,
Maher.
with Ben Singer and Malcolm Nance.
Okay. Any other announcements? Okay, then let's go on to the next part of our agenda, which would be Jewel Kelly, except that he's not here. So let's go on to Harvey Ferdman from Gateway Dems. Harvey? You have to unmute yourself, Harvey.
Yeah, details.
Yeah.
Can you give me permission to share my screen?
Share your screen? Sure. Hold on one second here.
Little up arrow next to it's part of the little green thing at the bottom of your screen. There's an up arrow.
Share screen, right. Been a little while since I've done that, I guess.
Hey, it's like, no, we're viewing your screen. You need to hit
Hold on.
actually, it looks like, no. You need to hit the little up arrow and then just give.
Oh, okay. Got it. So I hit the little up arrow on the right or the green up arrow?
The up arrow on the right.
Okay, multiple participants.
Yeah, just go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Let's see if I can do it now. Yay. Okay. So many of you may remember, first off, can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
No, that's not what I want you to see. Wait a minute. There's lots of screens open. Here we go. So the Mopag Progressive Summit. Many of you may remember when Mopag was first formed a while back, we ran a progressive summit that was very, very well attended. And it ended up being a one-time event, which is not what I expected it to be at the time, but I was kind of new to all this. Right now, we have a lot of groups that have popped up that are doing advocacy for all kinds of issues. And it's not clear that everyone's aware of who's working on what. I like to give voter registration. It's a good example that there's a lot of groups working on voter registration, even though that may not be in their name or an obvious thing that they would be doing. So Steve and I have been talking about a few things, and Steve kind of brought up the subject to me of, gee, it seems like a lot of these groups just don't know what each other's doing. And I said, well, part of Mopag, when it was first formed, part of the idea was to be an umbrella organization and kind of help these groups communicate and encourage synergies between them. So to that end, if Mopag were to decide to do a summit, and actually Steve had asked me if Gateway Democrats would be an appropriate venue for that, and my answer was absolutely not, which is really kind of breaks my heart to say that. But the reason is there are many of these groups that are 501c3s or 501c4s, and they're a little bit finicky about participating in anything that's partisan. And Mopag is nonpartisan. Gateway Democrats is obviously partisan. And I've had groups like the Jewish Women's, I can't even think of the right full name right now, but I think you guys all know they do voter, they're a very good group. They have all kinds of speakers. And they even checked with their national, with their lawyers, and they said, no, they cannot participate in anything that's sponsored by Gateway Democrats. We'd invited them to some other events. National Council of Jewish Women, who do a lot of really great progressive things. So to that end, Mopag seems to be the right venue if you guys are interested, and it would address the question that Steve had raised to me about, isn't there a way to get these folks all to kind of know what each other's doing and maybe get some synergies. So to that, if Mopag were to decide to do it, here's what I would suggest. That we ask each group, and we want a broad number of groups, to present their mission, their top 3 goals, and somebody keeps track of those 3 goals, like on a spreadsheet organization, and what those goals are, because I expect we're going to see a lot of overlapping goals. The strengths that they have to achieve those goals, the needs they have to accomplish those goals, and any resources that can be shared with other groups. And I'm going to show my age here. But going back a few years, for example, folks were looking all over the place for webmasters. And maybe there's a group that happens to have a whole lot of webmasters looking for something to do. So sharing resources, whatever that may be, if they have excess of anything or anything they think would be easy to share. And then if it's successful, setting it up as a quarterly or biannual event, so that new groups as they pop up will show up, and the old groups can, just kind of do whatever they need to do. And I'm hoping that, like during the event or after the event or whatever, that folks that have common goals, these top 3 goals, that would kind of become the focus of these groups working together. They would say, oh, I didn't know you were working on that. Let's get together and chat. Let's figure out how we can help each other accomplish those goals and make sure we're not overlapping and showing up at the same place with 2 voter registration booths, for example. So that's kind of how this came about. Was Steve was kind of lamenting that, gee, it seems like there's a lot of new groups popping up, and who knows what they're doing or if they're working with other groups. And wouldn't Gateway Democrats be a great place to put this together? And I would love to do that with Gateway Dems, but again, there'd be some groups that can't participate. So I would propose, if you think this is a good idea, that Mopag consider doing this.
Okay, thanks, Harvey. Yeah, go ahead and anybody want to go ahead and chip in or ask questions, whatever?
I think it's a great idea. It's definitely needed. So
Yeah, I love it.
is this summit, this isn't an agenda so much, right, of the get together of the summit?
Well, I mean, that's what I would, not so much an agenda, but I would ask each one of them to present these things if they're, that's the idea. I think a lot of people know what each other's mission is, but this goes beyond the mission. This actually gets down to, maybe some working groups coming out of it. And that's the idea, is to see the collaboration and the synergies form, not just, oh yeah, I know you're working on that. That's not enough.
I can see the spreadsheet right now with the groups across the top and the goals going down the side, and then just X's where they apply. And
Yep.
then you can just scan across and see, oh, this particular goal, 4 different groups are working on.
Yep. And then to add to this, I had a conversation with Jill Shoup, and she said that she has a volunteer who is interested in building a website that would become a reference for all these groups. So you could go into the website and say, who's working on housing issues, and it would give you a list of advocacy groups in the areas that, well, she wants to do it statewide to volunteer. So that's something else that, as this happens, we have the opportunity to feed into that as well.
Yeah, other groups have tried this and they've just kind of puttered out. I'd like it if it got attached to our website somehow, just an extra page or something, and then, you know, then it'll just be there because our website will be there after the other groups. We'll see what she wants to do.
Yeah, Jill's actually was going to be under the, her proposal. She hasn't gotten this approved, but I think she's ultimately going to propose that it be on the Missouri Democratic website as a resource. But then again, we run into that. I mean, at that point, you can list anyone you want to list. It doesn't mean that they're endorsing it or participating. So I don't think you'll get pushback from the National Council of Jewish Women and those folks. But who knows? That's not my job right now. But she does have a volunteer that wants to build something that would be useful wherever it would live.
Right.
Okay, Don?
So I think that's a great idea. What I would add though is to enhance to ensure a quality of the presentations, I think, and enhance our record keeping process. And there's a model for this, and that is, and I'm sure we've all attended them, where you have 3 or 4 minutes and you do a short PowerPoint presentation. They call them the 9x9 or 4x16 or whatever, you know, 4 minutes, 16 presentations, but you present your slides. And I know one of the problems you have, because I did this with a healthcare group 2 years ago, is the note taking becomes an enormous challenge without some, you know, initial documentation to work with. The other comment I would make is that we need to be able to have this discussion in the context of what's our collective impact on the major issues confronting our metropolitan area. And I say that, and hopefully maybe we'll have further discussion later. I don't see a lot of our candidates focusing on the systemic issues that need to be addressed, that we consistently fail on. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that this particular exercise is focused on facilitating coordination of efforts rather than picking the issues. Whatever these groups are working on, they're passionate about, and that's wonderful. And I think the more people that get involved in advocacy groups, the more voters we have. So I appreciate wanting to be focused on benefit to our metropolitan area, but that's not. I think this is more to facilitate the groups to become better and stronger, whatever they're doing, and we're not picking the issues.
This is not specifically to win the 2nd congressional district. This is not specifically to, it is that the goal is a more general goal.
Yeah.
Right, Harvey? In
Yeah,
terms,
it's to encourage collaboration, with the synergy, so that these folks can be even stronger. The stronger they are, the more people they're going to attract. The more people they attract, the more people we know are going to vote progressive.
My
It has
only
good
comment
byproducts.
there
It has
is
good byproducts.
that, and I've had this comment from state senators and just recently with a major public official here in the metro area. We got a lot of people making a lot of money that in these organizations that are afraid to break out of their stakeholder mode and look at collective impact. And, you know, you look at the outcomes for our metropolitan area, which is a reflection of the country. Okay. You know, we can meet and talk, But unless we are changing the quality of people's lives here, we're all wasting our time.
Well, I agree with your last statement. I think that there's a lot of pop-up advocacy, and I think to that end, I would anticipate that the first summit that we ran would probably be 50 or 75% folks who are pretty well resourced financially, whether they fall into your category or not, Don. But what I'm hoping is by the third meeting, that the word is out that, hey, this is a good thing, and these little pop-up groups that we've never even heard of, because they're all over the place right now, that they would start to want to attend and benefit from the synergies. So it's really, the big guys all know what they're doing. They know what each other's doing. These folks will have paid professional staff. You're shaking your head no, but okay. So if they don't, then we'll get them in the same room and call them out. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to be the heavy here, and I just want to bring up a couple of issues here. So the first one was also raised by Ross in a chat, in terms of where might this be held? Would it be a virtual session, or or outdoors? Is that a possibility? Any thoughts on that, Harvey or others?
Well, my initial thought is it would be planned as virtual initially, but depending upon conditions, I'd love to see people in person. If we do it in person, we can make it longer and we can facilitate breakout rooms. We could actually, find a facility or set it up so that we can have maybe 5 or 6 areas for whatever those top 3 goals coalesce into, and let those people sit down and talk to each other on the spot. That would be ideal. Zoom does have the ability to do breakout rooms. I haven't used it, but it's part of the regular subscription. I've been in Zooms where I've been put in breakout rooms and they work very well. So potentially we could do that too. We could just have people identify what they want, or as we're tracking these top 3 goals, we can have someone behind the scenes making the room assignments and then break them up into those rooms. So there's ways to do it virtual. I mean, in person is preferred, but I think it's going to be a while before all this COVID stuff clears out. I hope I'm wrong.
Well, if you watch that Instagram with Dr. Topol, he seems to think this is pretty much, you're looking at about 6 weeks or so, and then it'll die off fairly quickly. But yeah, nobody really knows for sure. The second thing I wanted to make, it seems to be the consensus here that people think it's a good idea, and it's certainly part of our mission, Mopag mission. The next question is who would want to take a lead on it, and I'd like to take a lead on it, except that I feel like I'm pretty well booked with other things that I'm doing. So what that would mean would be identification of the groups, at least for this first session, and then managing any of the logistical details, making sure that whatever we want to be captured from the meeting is captured. And if that is virtual, that will be a lot easier, of course. I agree with you, Harvey, about the first one, at least if it's any time soon, will probably be a virtual meeting.
And I normally would volunteer to do this, but that's why I went into the history of how this came about. I'm also on the State House Redistricting Commission, and over the next couple of months, that's going to take a lot of my time along with some other things. So I'm a little bit reluctant to sign up. I'm more than happy to be a consultant on it, but I can't take the lead, which I would really like to do, but I can't.
Well, I'm certainly willing to help. You all are, I'm a retired typesetter. I've never had to do anything like this. So, I don't like to do things I don't know how to do. But if somebody would work as my manager and tell me what to do, I could do the legwork.
I think it mostly is a
write up
matter of,
an
I'm sorry, go ahead, Harvey.
I can write up an invitation and an explanation of what this thing is. And then, you guys decide, you guys figure out who to send it to and how we're going to do it. We'll do it virtual, that's fine. Pick the time and the date. But I can put together the invitation if you want. That'll be helpful.
And how do we automatically know who is and who isn't a 401c3 and 340C4 and?
Well, in this case, it doesn't matter because Mopag is not a political affiliate, right?
Well, I would say we're much
Nonpartisan.
closer to a 501c4 than a C3. We've given money to Democratic candidates, have Democratic speakers, never done a thing for Republicans. So to say we're a 501c3 would, I think, be stretching it.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying it doesn't matter because you guys are nonpartisan.
Right, we're not officially partisan.
We're not a part of the Democratic Party in any sense.
I guess I'm talking about, are you going to invite people before you know what their status is?
That's what I'm saying, is their status doesn't matter. And that's, it's very
Okay.
hard. It's expensive and takes time to get a 501c3 or C4. And a lot of these pop-up groups don't need it, and they probably are never going to get it. So again, hey, if this thing's really successful, we could end up running training classes for some of these pop-up groups. There's a lot of directions this can go. It would be useful. And again, I'm viewing it as a facilitation, not issues-based. They pick the issues. We facilitate helping them get it done.
Do you have any thoughts about the size of the first meeting? We have a list of groups. It's getting a little bit long in the tooth now.
Oh, you
on
have a
our
list
Mopag
already.
website, and I've heard that Vicki England, perhaps, and Jill were working to get a list of groups. I don't know how broad or how big we want to go. I mean, we could go very big.
Yes, very big.
That's how I found out about Jill's thing. She asked me if I had a list of groups.
There are 13,000 nonprofits in the metro area.
Well, we don't want to go that big.
No, we're looking for progressive advocacy groups.
We'll have to figure out, based upon the time limits. I mean, that's going to scope it down or certain, limit the amount of people. And then from the people you get, you figure you're going to get maybe 50% participation and so forth and so on. So, well, okay, Diane, we just got you down as
Grunt.
willing to work this.
Uh-huh.
And, myself and Harvey and others,
I'm glad to call people. Yeah, Al's glad to call people.
Yeah, when he was talking about an invite, was my thought, that we should call people because of what we just, engagement, the big thing now, so.
Right. Okay. All right, that sounds good.
So should I get a hold of Vicki and Jill Shoup and see if they have lists? Or do you want to start with what you have?
No, absolutely we should, but whether we should do it or.
Jill knows that I'm doing this today because she gave me permission to mention the website that she wants to develop. But I'm not sure she has a list yet. This is all really new. Vicki may have a list.
I'll contact Vicki. And you have one already, a partial one, you said?
I have what Gateway Democrats has used in the past, and it's really kind of a helter-skelter list right now. It includes a lot of candidates as well, because we were open to candidates, advocacy groups, individual advocates who, whatever, so.
There's
Let's
a
leave
number of
candidates off for
groups.
this.
There's a number of groups that were active in the past, and I have no idea if they're still active. For example, some of those huddle groups out there in the West County, I don't know if they're still meeting or not.
Oh, yeah, I remember them.
Yeah,
Oh.
Paul, that's what we got to call them.
yep.
Yep.
Okay,
That's the idea.
thank you very much, Harvey. I
Great.
think that probably concludes this segment then.
Yeah.
And let's go on to,
Before we say goodbye to Harvey, I have a question, and that has to do with what I brought up before the meeting. The radio stations that Bob Romanek owned the licenses for have been put up for auction. And as of a couple of weeks ago, there was an article in the Post. There had been no bids on those licenses. And I was curious if anybody to the left of Bob Romanek had the resources,
That's the
had
whole world.
had the resources to make a bid on at least one of those licenses, because it would be nice to have a talk radio station in the metro area where you could have a rational discussion about the issues, and that possibly some of the labor organizations or some of the more, progressive organizations could come together to find the resources to make a bid.
Boy, that would be great, wouldn't it?
Wow.
Because we could talk to each other all the time on the radio.
Wow.
I would suggest we talk to Byron Lear.
Hearing
What?
what you said.
say that again, Harvey?
I said I would suggest we talk to Byron Lear.
That's a good one. Kenny Murdoch is another. Kenny Murdoch is another.
You guys know these people. Could you talk to them and just sort of make mention and because I don't know anything about how one would go about making a bid. But there was an article in the Post a couple of weeks ago about this, and I don't know what the time period is or whether it goes on until somebody makes a bid. But anyway, it's a word to the wise. I don't know what to do other than let you know about it.
Okay.
Well, unless someone takes it for action, it'll probably die.
I will. I'll do it. I'm going to call Byron and Kenny.
All right, thanks.
And
Thanks,
and
Al.
believe it or not, Al, Jill may have some ideas too coming out of the advertising world.
Oh, her husband. That's right.
Yeah, they may have some ideas, but
Okay.
maybe it's putting a coalition of those folks together or something.
Okay.
Okay. Let's move on then to our guest speaker, Jewel Kelly. So there are 10 Republican candidates for U.S. Senate to replace Blunt in the primary. Jewel Kelly is one of 6 Democrats who are running, and he's going to join us. He has joined us today to speak about his candidacy and answer our questions. So, Jewel, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, thank you all for inviting me. I apologize. I was late. I was desperately trying to find the link, and eventually I found it. And right when I found it, she emailed me the link. So glad to be here. Thank you for having me on the call. For those of you who don't know me, and I see some of you I've met on previous calls, and I was able to meet Al in person. And so thank you again. My name is Jewel Kelly, and I am running for the U.S. Senate. I'm running because too many Americans are suffering, and we no longer can suffer in silence. Now, I'll get a little bit into my background, but before I do so, how much time do I have? Do I have 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes? How much?
I would anticipate something like about 30 minutes or so.
Okay,
or
okay, good.
On the questions and answers and discussion.
okay.
But sure, we have plenty of time.
Good, good. So, well, thank you for that. I will be able to go a little bit more into my background now that I have more than the standard 5 to 10 minutes that we're typically given. So let me start off with my background and I'll go into that. But before I do that, I certainly want to make sure right at the top of the call, what I believe are some of the top priorities that you won't get much disagreement from Democrats. You may get some from Republicans, but the answer always, or at least the challenge is always the how, right? But what I believe that, the top core issues are, first of all, reducing the cost of healthcare, including mental health. Now, there's tremendous discussions as how should we reduce the cost, whether it should be universal or whether it should be something less or more than what we have today. The second priority that I think most Democrats will agree on is we certainly need to stimulate the economy to create more jobs. So that normally isn't an issue in terms of whether we should do it. The question again is how do we do it? And then the third one is reducing the cost of education, including bringing down student debt. Again, everyone acknowledges that our education system leaves much to be desired in terms of cost. But then again, how are we going to reduce those costs? Protecting the environment, I would say, is a fourth priority that we all feel that we need to do, and address climate change. And then the fifth one, and again, these are not necessarily in order in terms of priority being the most priority to the least priority, but I'm just saying these 5 because these are the 5 core things that I talk about every single time that I am given the opportunity. And the fifth one is provide equal protection under the law. And of course, right now, today, voting rights is a huge, huge issue. And I would certainly include voting rights as one of those things that we certainly need to protect and make sure that it's equal and accessible to everyone. So those kind of are the top 5 issues. Let me get a little bit more into my background. For those of you who have not heard, I am the eldest of 18 brothers and sisters by the same mother and father. So come from a huge family, and I'm the eldest. There were 10 boys and 5 girls. And, praise be to God, I was the first to graduate college, get my, bachelor's degree, then went ahead and got my MBA, my master's degree. And because I served in the military, and I'll talk a little bit about my military experience, I was able to get a second master's degree from Washington University School of Law in legal studies, paid for by the GI Bill. So thank God for the GI Bill. And so I'm very honored, and it was hard being the first to go to college and do that. But the point and the reason why I bring this up is when I got my bachelor's degree, I told my 17 younger brothers and sisters that if I can do it, you can do it. And thank God they listened. 17 of 18 of my brothers and sisters have gone to college. 12 have gotten their bachelor's degrees, and 5 have gotten their master's degrees. But the sibling that I really want to talk about today is the one that didn't, right? So I said 17 out of 18 went to college. The one that didn't get a chance to go to college was my youngest sister. And the reason why is because she was born blind. She's never been able to walk or talk. She had cerebral palsy. And thank God, my father, even though we grew up poor, I was raised pretty much in a single wide trailer, 10 foot wide by 55 foot long. So I was poor, but thank God my father had a union protected job that had healthcare. And it was because of my father's healthcare that my youngest sister that was born in a NICU, born with cerebral palsy, spent months and months in a NICU, she was able to be given the top medical care that was available at that time. And we're talking the mid 90s. So my point is, when I talk about, reducing the cost of healthcare, not only is it important, it's personal. It was pure luck from my perspective that I happened to be born to a father that had a union protected job that had healthcare. There was nothing that I did to earn that, right? that was pure luck from my standpoint. But I certainly understand how important it is to have healthcare. And thank God my father did. And I'm proud to announce that even though my youngest sister wasn't expected to live more than 3 months, she is now 27 years old. So healthcare definitely matters. Having access to healthcare matters. And unlike what we hear on the other side, it isn't a matter of making smart choices in a lot of cases, because there wasn't a single choice that I made. I happened to be born to a father that had that. Now, obviously my father had to work and maintain a job, but still, I see how even if you're poor, like in my case, sometimes things are given to you or you happen to be able to take advantage of that simply of who your parents were. So that never left me. And I am a witness to that today, that, healthcare shouldn't be an issue of whether you happen to be born to someone that has a union protected job or not, as to whether or not you have access to healthcare. And I can also, repeat what I feel that probably most people on this call would agree with, that, it's not fair for one person to be born and get the best healthcare available and another person to be born to a different set of parents and not. So there's the fairness question. A little bit more about me. So after I graduated college, I got my MBA degree and I started to go out and look for jobs. And, I was running into a familiar scenario where I wanted to get into management with no experience, right? I had the degrees, but I didn't have experience. And then 9/11 happened. And our country was attacked, as you all know. And I said, well, I know the military is looking for people. So I raised my right hand and I swore to protect and defend the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I ended up serving 10 years in the United States Air Force as a logistics officer. Basically, my job was to supervise a team of maintainers to make sure that the aircraft took off and landed on time. So I deployed twice in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. After my 10 years in the military, I was hired by GE Healthcare, and we make the CT, MR, X-ray machines in hospitals. And so that's brought me here to Missouri. So in addition to 10 years of military experience as an officer, I have 10 years of corporate experience as well, working for a very, at one point, it was one of the largest companies in the world with GE. In addition to my corporate experience, and what I'm most proud about Missouri is, in Missouri, here is where I met my beautiful wife, Karen. So Karen Kelly, we have 3 daughters, Casey, who is an ER nurse. And again, that's why healthcare is very, very personal to me, not just important. She's an ER nurse in one of the hospitals in North County, St. Louis. You might have heard of it. It's called DePaul. And so her first year in healthcare, we happened to have a pandemic. So you can imagine how stressful that was for someone to finish nursing school in the very first year to be thrust in the front lines. So Casey is the oldest. That's actually Karen's daughter. And then I have a daughter. Her name is Courtney. And then we have one more daughter. Her name is Cameron. And Cameron, and this is something that was significantly, impacted my life. Cameron died in 2018 by suicide. And as you would expect, we went through those 4 stages of grief. We went through the shock, of course, of losing her to suicide. And the thing that was really shocking was, we were taking Cameron because we knew she had mental health issues. So she was seeing a psychologist and a psychiatrist and everything. And we actually thought the week that she made that tragic decision, we actually thought she was getting better. But we went through the shock, the first stage. The second stage we went through, of course, was the anger of how did we miss the signs, right? We were taking her, we thought we were doing everything that we were supposed to do, and yet she passed away. So we went through the anger of that. The third stage, of course, is the depression that she was gone with us in body, but her spirit remains with us today. And then the fourth stage was nothing is going to change unless we change, okay? And so what we did after a few months, we realized that rather than suffer in silence and try to deal with the stigma and the guilt and all those emotions that are associated with suicide, we would open ourselves up. And we started a foundation called a Fighting Chance Foundation. And 7 brave individuals joined us. We have a medical doctor, we have an attorney, we have a physical therapist, a retired police officer, a broad range of experiences, so that, of course, a mental health counselor, a broad range of experiences and friends. And we said, okay, how can we help? Because unfortunately, we're not the only family that ever goes through this. There are thousands upon thousands of families that are going through exactly the same thing that we went through. And often they're suffering in silence. And so the goal of the foundation was to do 2 things. The first one is to promote the mental health first aid class. And I'll pause right now. Has anyone heard about the mental health first aid class? Anybody heard of it? No one's heard of it. We hadn't either. But let me tell you, if there's one thing that you remember from this call, forget the politics. Remember this: mental health first aid class. What the class teaches you is there are 5 steps, and they have an acronym called ALGEE, ALGEE. And so I'll go through each of those 5. But the 5 steps are assess and how to assess if someone's having a mental health crisis. The second step is to listen non-judgmentally. And as parents and as brothers and sisters, and me being the eldest, I thought I was a pretty good listener. But where I will admit that I'm very bad is listening non-judgmentally, right? As the eldest, we think we know more than all of our other siblings. And as a parent, of course, we think that we know what's best for our child or stepchild, but the non-judgmentally part is huge. And so they teach you how to do that. You have role playing and so forth. The third step is to give support, give information, like where do you go? And unfortunately, we didn't know what to do when we saw certain behaviors. We really didn't know. And then the 2 E's, encourage professional help. There are some point in times, especially, when you see significant changes in behavior, they need professional help, right? And if they don't get it, you're in a much tougher spot than if they did. And then the last stage is to encourage self-help, because there are things that we can do. So anyway, that's the first goal of our foundation. And all of this is going to tie into politics. I'll remind you this. And then the second step is to encourage the community to get involved with the local resources, because much to our surprise, there are a ton of resources that are out there. We just didn't know about it. And then even more importantly, even if we had known about it, we probably still would not have taken advantage of it because of parental bias, right? So the second step of our foundation really is to address the parental bias, to say it can happen to you, it did happen to us. And of course, being proactive is a lot better than being reactive. And so those are the 2 things that we do with our foundation, the Fighting Chance Foundation. So you say, well, how does all of this tie into politics, and why did you decide to run? Well, I'll tell you why. I just went through the 4 stages of our grief, right? But America went through 4 stages of grief as well. Think about America in the last 12 to 18 months. Think about where you were last May, when you saw the shock of George Floyd being murdered. The police officer knew that he was being recorded. He had his sunglasses on the top of his head, his hands in his pocket. George Floyd was handcuffed, face down, and yet he was murdered right in front of our eyes. So America went through the shock of that. America also went through the depression of a pandemic. Think about what we went through, where we saw hundreds, and then thousands, and then tens of thousands, and then hundreds of thousands. And sort of like what we went through with suicide, we all had to be separated from one another, right? The pandemic, the nature of COVID-19 kept us apart. And we saw our loved ones sometimes dying alone. So America went through that depression stage. And then the third stage that we went through as a country is the stage of anger. Think about how everyone felt. I'm a military veteran on January 6th. when we saw our capital being assaulted by a mob of insurrectionists, and they were using, you guys can see here, this American flag to beat law enforcement officers. I can tell you, I haven't been so angry since September the 11th. And I would dare say probably many of you on this call felt that same source of anger. And then the fourth stage is acceptance. Nothing is going to change unless we change. So when I said 20 years ago, and I can't believe it was 20 years ago, but 20 years ago, I raised my right hand to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And 20 years ago, the enemy was clearly foreign, right? It was Al-Qaeda, it was the Taliban. They had attacked our country. January 6th, the enemy was domestic. But once again, just like 20 years ago, I said, I can no longer sit down in silence. I'm available. I will help, right? I will help serve America again. And so that's why I'm running. I'm running because too many people are suffering. America is only as strong as our weakest link. And this pandemic really highlighted what I talked about earlier, where if you happen to have a job where you could work remotely, the pandemic and the economy didn't really, matter of fact, for some it got better, right? But if you happen to have a job where you saw people face to face, as in the service industry and a lot of those hospitality industry, even some of the schools, the impact was so unfair. And so what I'm proposing and what I think my campaign is different from some of the other, and I will support any of the Democrat candidates that win the primary. But where I think I'm different is, instead of running on by party, or some of our candidates say they want to fundamentally change who has power, I'm running on principle. And you say, well, what does that mean? I believe that, and I'm a moderate, and you say, well, what does being moderate means? Running on principle simply means being reasonable. And you say, well, what does reasonable mean? Reasonable in my mind means, is it legal or should it be legal, right? That's something we have laws, we have statutes, we have constitutions, and we have a Supreme Court to decide what's legal and what's not, right? The second thing is it safe? And if you think about the pandemic and using a mask or a vaccine, for example, which policy is going to keep us safe, right? We're not talking about Republican or Democrat, we're talking about safety. And then the third question is it fair? So when I go out and about, those are the three questions that I always ask. Is it legal? Is it safe? And is it fair? Another way you can say that is justice, safety, and equality, right? Though that's the core of what I feel that we believe. And that's the message that I think, whether I win or not, we need to see more of that. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether Jewel Kelly is elected to the US Senate. What matters is, do we have people that will ask the question, what's legal? Let's start with that. And so example, the Medicaid, expanding Medicaid. The question was, can the voters pass up, or actually go to the polls and pass a ballot initiative to expand Medicaid? Is it legal? The Supreme Court said, yes, it was. Is it safe, right? Think about this pandemic. Is it safer or is it not safe for us to expand Medicaid during a pandemic? I think any public health care official will tell you, regardless of whether they're a Republican or Democrat, that yes, expanding Medicaid will make us more safe. And then the third question is it fair? And, it's kind of a rhetorical question, but think about this. How fair is something that's universal? If we're saying that everyone gets it, you may say we don't have the money for it, but it's pretty hard to argue that if you're saying everyone should get it, it's pretty hard for you to say that that's somehow unfair. So, that's where I think the conversation needs to start. And again, I freely acknowledge that the devil is in the details, and the how is where you're going to get most of the disagreement. But in terms of the what, I think we all can agree that reducing the cost of healthcare, stimulating the economy to create more jobs, reducing the cost of education and bringing down student debt, protecting the environment and addressing climate change, and providing equal protection under the law, those are all just goals, they're all safe goals, and they're all fair goals. So the question is the degrees as to how. And that's a policy discussion that I think we should legitimately have. So having said that, I'll pause now and open it up for questions. But I hope, I took a little bit of time to explain who I am, why I'm running, and what separates me from some of the other Democratic candidates. So I'm curious to hear your questions. I can't hear anyone.
I got something.
Yes.
We're, this group is have been in politics a long time. And so we're interested not only in your policies, but in your process of how you're putting your campaign together. And so that how's it going there? Do you have anybody like from the other side of the state that you have talked to that is supporting you or anything like that?
Yes.
How's that part of it?
Yeah, so let me acknowledge that. First of all, it's going well, but in terms of name recognition and in terms of dollars, of course, anyone can go on the FEC website and see the donations to each of the candidates, right? And so I knew that I was starting from square one. And like I told my younger brothers and sisters 20 odd years ago, that if I can do it, you can do it. And here's the point. My goal isn't necessarily, even though of course I would absolutely love to win, and I will do everything that I possibly can to win. But even more importantly than Jewel Kelly being elected to the US Senate, what's most important is me encouraging other people to say, just like I told my younger brothers and sisters, if I can do it, you can do it. I like to joke and say, if a skinny Black guy can run in rural America, surely you can too. The goal, one of my goals is to simply say, look, if I can get 5 other people to run for public office at any level, whether it's for alderman, whether it's for city board, whether it's for mayor, whether it's for the US Senate, well, that 5 can now become 25. And that 25 can become 125, right? You truly have that grassroots effort because, my favorite president, and I'm not that old, but of course I voted for President Obama twice. And so you look at what he did, right? He was the first Black African-American to run. But what's surprising is not necessarily what he did, but it's what he couldn't do, right? And he's president of the United States. And what's exciting about that is it takes more than one person. And it certainly takes more than one person to have a sustained improvement, right? Even if he were successful in passing every bill, the very next president can almost, systematically undo everything that the previous president's done. So the goal is never really to my goal at least is not necessarily to say, Jewel Kelly win at all costs. My goal really is to be an inspiration to others to run. And oh, by the way, if we happen to be successful, great. But if we're not successful in 2022, guess what? 2024 is right around the corner. The example that I love to use is Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams lost her race, and she was an extremely qualified candidate. But you know what she did? Right now, we have 2 US senators from the state of Georgia that are Democrats. So she had the big picture in mind. And trust me, her story is not complete, right? I know that there are bigger and greater things for Stacey Abrams, but the point is when people, and a lot of it is my naysayers, so say, well, Jewel, do you possibly think you can win? I said, well, it depends on what your definition is of winning. If I can get and motivate other people to get engaged, that is true winning, right? So, I think of 3 I's. I want to bring more inclusion. I want to bring more imagination, and I want to bring more inspiration to this state, right? Our campaign logo is, there is no fear in love. Now, I happen to be a Christian, and for those who read the Bible, you will realize that that comes from the Bible. But whether you're a Christian or not, I think that is a very, inspiring message. There is no fear in love. And when I reflect back to January 6th, and I think about those Capitol Police officers that willingly risked their lives to save and protect Congress people that won't even acknowledge that they were heroes. Matter of fact, some of our opponents on the other side will say that they were in cahoots, right, with the mob. It's heartbreaking. But the point is, when you have love for your country, when you have love for one another, it doesn't matter. You don't mind losing. You're not afraid of losing. You don't mind putting in the work because you know that there's more at stake and you know that it's bigger than one person. And so, yes, I think the campaign is going well. And, slowly but surely reaching out to organizations like you. I've probably spoken to about 10 Democratic Central Committee clubs, right, throughout the state. And of course, every week, every month, I'm speaking to more. Slowly but surely the name is getting out there. And the number one thing that I have to do is get name recognition. And the number one way to get name recognition is to run. So long answer to a short question, but I hope that kind of gives you a little peek behind my decision making and how I see things. Next question.
Susan Turk has got a question for you.
Yes, Susan.
Regarding your stand on education, you talk about lowering student debt. Well, that's on the college level. Could you address education K through 12?
Yes. So President Biden right now is pushing through two bills. One of them is the jobs bill, and the other bill, he's now calling it human infrastructure. And when I was reading through his job bill, he said something that I had never seen it put that way. And I honestly think we politicians need to do a better job of pushing this message. And this is what he said. He said, for every dollar that we invest, starting at kindergarten, actually preschool, we get $7 back on the return on investment. Now, some of that is ways that you would expect, right? A more educated force, you can get a better job, et cetera. But some of it is cost avoidance, where he's saying, if you have a student they have an investment starting at preschool, and they're able to make it to first grade at the same level as their peers, and they're able to make it to high school at the same level of their peers, they're much more, the risk and the probability of them completing high school and being a productive member of society is so much greater than if they didn't complete preschool and now they're behind in first grade and they're behind in fifth grade. Obviously, if you drop out of high school, the chances of you getting involved with criminal activity, the chances of you being left behind goes up. And so there is a cost, and the exact details were not necessarily in the job bill, but there was that one sentence that I 100% agree with. And that is, every dollar that we invest in our pre-K on up is $7 on a return on investment. So I entirely support investing more in our education. And so the question is, how? Where are you going to get the money? And this is something that I really think that we can do a better job as of politicians of explaining. Did you know, and I'm a military guy, I'm a veteran.
I want to stop you right now.
Go ahead.
You've talked about college and you've talked about pre-K. What about K through 12?
Yes, it starts with the budget. Change happens when budgets change. And so the question is, how am I going to get more funding from K through 12? And here's where I would start. As a veteran, I've looked at the discretionary spending of the federal government. And did you know that it's 51%? So that means the rest, the Department of Education, the Department of Justice, the Department of Agriculture, everyone else is fighting for that 49%. If we were to cut the Department of Defense, and I'll explain to you what I mean by cutting the Department of Defense, by 10%, we would double the budget for education, double it. And you say, well, how can we cut the Department of Education or Department of Defense by 10%? One Joint Strike Fighter, again, I'm an aircraft guy, it costs $100 million. Instead of our...
I'm with you on that,
yes.
But I also know that the federal part of most school districts' education revenue is only about 5 to 7%.
Yes,
So you're still talking about a very small amount of money, because most money that supports K through 12 education comes from local property taxes.
yes, it
And
does.
that sets us up for inequity completely across the country.
Yes,
Let me cut to the chase. I'd like to know, because you spoke about President Obama and his education policies were not what I would consider to be helpful for the country. His education department looked at what they consider to be failing public schools and decided that turning them around and improving them meant giving private corporations and companies the opportunity to get involved in public education process, and it did not work.
yes.
So, do you have a position on the privatization of the management of public school districts or individual schools? And do you have a position on charter schools and school choice?
Yes. Here's my answer. My answer is I agree that what President Obama did not work. And if we were to continue the same policies, it won't work in 2021 or 2022. Here's how we solve it. We can no longer, as you acknowledge, have our K through 12 funded primarily by property taxes. It has to come from the top down. And so what I was trying to get at is, well, if it comes from the top down, you have to pay for it. How are you going to pay for it at the federal level? You pay for it by at least doubling the amount of money that the federal government extends to the states. Now, that's not enough, but it is a start. And so to double the Department of Education's budget, you would have to cut the defense, all other things being equal, you have to cut the defense budget by 10%. Cutting the defense budget by 10% is not as hard as one may think. I'll give you an example. If you have a joint strike fighter that's $100 million, and they literally cost $100 million, we're the US government. What is wrong with going to the defense contractors? And I actually work for a defense contractor. GE makes aircraft engines, but what is wrong with going to a defense contractor and saying, look, we're not paying you $100 million for this aircraft. We're only going to pay you $90 million, okay? Oh, you don't like it? Well, then we're going to go to the competitor. I'm a realtor. If I don't offer a competitive rate, I will no longer be able to attract clients. But we know how the federal system is set up. Our CEOs and our lobbyists for defense contractors, they go to our politicians, right? If I were to be elected, you better believe I would get a call from my defense lobbyist and say, Jewel, we will donate X amount of $1 million to your campaign if you agree to sign this contract, right? So the change has to happen at the budget level, right? Change happens when budgets change. We can have all the policies in the world, but if they're not funded, there is no change. So the short answer to your question is, we have to change how we fund our public schools. We need more funding from the federal government. And the only way you're going to get more funding from the federal government is you have to cut some of the defense spending, and you have to spend it on things that truly make us more safe, that are more fair, and that are more just. And seeing that the Defense Department gets 51% of our discretionary spending, it only makes logical sense that we start there. And then I'll say one more thing as a rhetorical question to you, and I think you probably would agree with me. We spent $2 trillion in Iraq. We spent about $4 trillion in Afghanistan. Now, let me ask you this. Are we more safe? Are we more fair? And is it just that we attack those countries in the name of installing democracy, right? That's a hypothetical question, but imagine if we had spent that $6 trillion on the Department of Education, not 6 billion, 6 trillion, right? So I'm not talking something that's theoretical, but I am talking about principle.
Thing is, you're talking about spending more money, and a certain segment of our country will say spending more money is not going to solve the problem. And I will tell you that spending money on certain things, like say educational management companies, isn't going to solve the problem. So what do you spend the more money on? Do you spend it on smaller class sizes? Do you spend it on more school counselors? Do you spend it on more intensive language therapists and physical therapists and social workers? What do you spend them? What is it that you are spending the more education dollars on?
It certainly starts with people, but by people, I don't mean consultants. Let's start with teachers, right? Let's start with students. If starting with teachers, I mentioned that I have 17 younger siblings, right? And 2 of my younger siblings, they substitute teach. But I can tell you that they made more working a factory than they did by being a substitute teacher. So when you're talking about where do you spend the money, I say start with the teachers and start with the students. And again, even if I had the perfect solution, 99 other senators are not going to get behind a freshman senator, Jewel Kelly, and say, yep, Jewel, you're right. This is what we're going to do, right? So my point is, it definitely pays to get into the details and understand the process, and for me to lay out how Jewel Kelly would spend it. But what's more important is to have a foundation and argument to say, look, here's the goal. The goal is to spend our education dollars in a way that is just, that is safe, and that is fair. We're going to have disagreements, right? But if you have it along those frameworks, you give yourself something to shoot for. But to answer your specific questions, no, we don't need more management companies to tell us that our teachers are underpaid. We don't need management consultants to tell us that if you look at the dollars spent per student in Ferguson, it's not the same per dollar spent per student in Ladue, right? And I'm using St. Louis, cities as an example, right? But you get my point. So Ladue is a very high income neighborhood, and Ferguson is not. So yeah, so some of it isn't as hard as we think, but it is very hard to make change unless we continue to hammer home the point. Change happens when budgets change. You have to start with the budget. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Don. Don Loeb, you're on mute.
Yeah. So Susan, in part, raised the question of trust in government, and your discussion talks about, I think, in essence, trust in in the integrity of the budget process. With regard to healthcare, you talk about reducing the cost of healthcare, and I got the impression it was aimed at consumers. But again, going back to trust in government and costs, how would you reduce both the cost of healthcare to the consumer as well as our cost as far as what it takes out of our economy, and yet at the same time improve quality?
Yeah, I'll start with the end in mind. I truly believe that it is possible, it is more just, it is more fair, and it is more legal if we end up with a universal healthcare system. Now, I'm not totally naive to how difficult it is to get there. So I think that unfortunately, it will have to be a step process, right? We don't go from what we have today to universal healthcare. But I think having the end in mind and being very clear about it, that this is our goal. And the benefit of having a system where, one, everyone gets it, and we're not paying for Medicare, or we're not paying for insurance, and all of our, the majority of our budget being to say who should and who shouldn't get healthcare based on what insurance policy they have, that's not very efficient. And so I think from a consumer standpoint, obviously, if you have the bare basics of healthcare, you are not going to pay as much by being preventative than if you would, because you don't have healthcare, you wait until you get into an emergency room where it's too late, essentially. Or if it's not too late, it's costing 5-10 times more than it would cost than if you had simply gotten the preventative healthcare up front. Like I mentioned, my bonus daughter, my stepdaughter, works in the ER. So almost everyone that she sees it's at the point of where they're way past any type of preventative. It's critical. It can't be ignored any longer. And she can tell you the level of care that she's providing isn't necessarily what the patient would have need if they had simply gone to their and had access and been able to talk to their primary care physician 2 or 3 years earlier. So that's the first point. The second point, consumer related, is if we didn't learn anything in this pandemic, we're never going to learn anything. Because think about the people who died. It wasn't necessarily the people that were the least in shape. The people that were dying were those who had the pre-existing conditions. And of course, those who had, immunity that were immunocompromised. But the vast majority of those pre-existing conditions shouldn't have been pre-existing, right? Diabetes. These are known issues that we have known treatments for. But if you can't access healthcare, like I mentioned earlier during my talk, my sister had access to the best healthcare that she could afford, and we were dirt poor, but it was only because my father had a union job, right? So that's the key. The vast majority of cost is because we are reactive instead of proactive. And I'll give you one example. In my day job, I work for GE Healthcare. And part of what I do is I look for outliers. We install the systems and we charge a company X amount of dollars to service it, right? But what we found is if you do not address the root causes up front, that cost outlier, the systems that I'm responsible for identifying, they are 4 to 5 times more expensive than your normal system. And, a person's life matters more than dollars and cents. But in terms of being proactive and being reactive, the same principles apply. Our costs would be drastically reduced if we focused more on preventative care, starting with our primary care physicians. But you cannot go see your primary care physician if you don't have a system that's going to pay for it. And so that's got to change. And so that's why when I answer the question, the end in mind is you have universal healthcare where people can go see their primary care physicians and not worry about getting a $2,000 or $3,000 bill, right? So that's the goal. Now, I don't have all the answers. I'll be honest up front. You guys know I don't have all the answers, so I'm not going to even pretend. But I do have a backbone, right? I have a goal in mind that I think will make us more safe, it's more fair, and it's more just. Go ahead.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone? If not, I want to thank Jewel for, Susan, you have something else?
Yeah.
No, the one thing I'll say is, and again, hopefully you guys, can write this down. The second leading cause of death for our young people is unfortunately suicide. 22 veterans die every day through suicide. And so you guys can tell that really, really matters to me, right? My bonus daughter passed because of that. And the good news is in a lot of cases, it is preventable, right? When we talk about being preventable versus reactive, mental health care is important. This pandemic really highlighted to us how important it is. And so if there's nothing that you take away from my discussion today, is please write down mental health first aid class. If you go online, you can find where the classes are, they're free. And part of what I would do, one of the very first things I would do as a US Senator would be look for ways specifically to increase the budget for funding so that people can take that class. And why it's so important for me is because it saves lives, right? When I talk about what's just, what's safe, and what's fair, there's very few things, if any, more important than the lives of our kids, right? And unfortunately, hundreds upon hundreds, thousands of kids are dying, due to suicide. And a lot of those issues could have been addressed if we focus on mental health. Mental health is part of healthcare, and it should be. And unfortunately, because our budgets are so out of whack, we're not spending enough money. We're not spending enough resources. We're not educating the community at large. And even when those resources are available, biases and stigma prevent us from taking advantage of those things that are out there. So if there's nothing that you took from my call today, it is the importance of mental health and my commitment to do everything that I possibly can to explain how important it is, and also to help guide the way to acknowledge that it is preventable. It is something that we can prevent, but it takes one person at a time. It takes people just like you, all of us working together to make Missouri a better place.
Steve, I would like to ask Jewel again to bring him back to education, because that's my obsession. Mr. Kelly, you dodged part of the question that I asked you earlier. Now, if you become the Democratic candidate, if you win the primary and you become the candidate, and if by some stroke of luck you manage to beat the Republican candidate and become our next U.S. Senator, you will be voting on legislation in the Senate that will impact education policy in the United States. There are Democrats in the Senate who support creating alternatives to traditional education in public school district run schools. In other words, school choice. And there are Democrats who do not. Would you be the kind of Democrat who would promote school choice or alternative forms of education? Or would you be the kind of Democrat who would not vote for expanding school choice and seeing competition as a means of improving our public schools?
Yes.
Where do you stand on that?
I am against school choice. I am not for those who are willing to take tax dollars and put them into places where they don't have to comply with the legal, safe, and fair checks that our public schools have to deal with, right? I mean, let's be honest. That's one of the reasons why there's so much focus on, and I don't know how much time you have, CRT and all of that stuff, is because they don't like it, right? They don't want to be held accountable to the existing laws as they are today. They certainly don't want to be accountable to school boards where an engaged community can have a say. And so the more they can take those dollars and put it into ways and into methods, alternative methods, as you mentioned, where they don't have to play by the rules that are fair, safe, and honest, then they're going to do that. So no, unfortunately, there are Democrats who support it. There are far more Republicans who do. But, I think some Democrats support it because, they're thinking, I'll support whatever makes us win. And I'm the type of candidate where, that's not me.
Thank you. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because of the 6 Democratic candidates, we've had 2 of the others talk to us, and the other 2 who have addressed Mopag so far also did not support school choice. But one of the leading candidates is a proponent of school choice, and so this sets you apart.
Yes.
And it is something that you can use to differentiate yourself. In a field of 6 candidates, that's an issue that you can use to say, if you vote for this person, this is what you're going to get. And if you vote for me, this
Correct.
is what you're going to get. And quite frankly, a lot of people are not aware of that other candidate's pro-choice position.
Yes.
And so, thank you for being, articulating your position. I consider it to be the correct position, so I can support you as a candidate. But that's an important issue, and don't shy away from it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jewel, for coming to speak today.
Thank you, Steve.
It's very informative, and We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'll see you all. Anybody by chance going to the St. Louis County Gala later on today? Okay, I'll see you there. I'll see
And
you
I
there.
also want to say that, I mean, we're more than a year out from, well, we are at this point, a year out from the
Yes.
primary.
Yes,
So as we get closer to August of 2022, we hope that we'll hear from you again as a reminder,
yes,
to sort of give us a shot in the arm
thank you.
about your candidacy next year, so that this should not be the last that Mopag hears from you.
Definitely not. Thank you so much for the invitation.
I
Go ahead,
have a
Arby.
question before you go, Jewel.
Yes,
Yes, I will see you tonight.
I'm glad. Thank you.
And-
Yes, my wife and I will be there. She's the better half.
Okay, me too. Well, first off, thank you for being here today. You have a mastery of a lot of the issues, and I really appreciate the depth and the statistics. That means a lot to me personally. I like that.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, how much do you have to raise to be in the primary? What's fundraising look like?
Well, fundraising right now is slow. So I'm glad you mentioned it. For those who may want to donate, Jewel Kelly, my first name, Jewel, Kelly, KELLY.com. The first, up till now, and you can go, this is all public knowledge. You can go to FEC website and all see it and see it. But it was like 4,000 total. And so right now, the majority of what I'm doing, frankly, is self-funded. God has blessed me with the position where I'm able to, donate to get it off the ground, but it takes a village. And so for those of you who are on the call, if you don't mind going, that's great. I joke, but I'm not joking. I said it would take a miracle for me to win, but here's the thing. I believe in miracles, right? I truly believe in miracles, and it's not about me. It really isn't. It is about inspiring other people to run. And like I said, if a skinny black guy can run in rural Missouri in this day, then surely all of us can help. So that's really what it's about. I consider success similar to what Stacey Abrams did. She lost her first race, but we got 2 US senators sitting in the spot. And I know that her story isn't done. And that's the perspective that I like to bring to Missouri. We've got a lot of work to do, but it starts one day at a time. It starts one person at a time. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. I'll see some of you tonight.
Okay, bye-bye, Joel.
All right. Take care. Bye.
All right, let's turn to some other topics people may have. Anybody want to bring anything up?
Oh, we were on there. I talked to Byron and Kenny Murdoch, both of them very interested. They know some people they want to talk to.
Okay, sounds great. Ray Reed, Susan Turk put Ray Reed in touch with me, and he's running for the 2nd Congressional District, as some may know, and was interested in coming to our Mopag meeting, I believe in October. Our next Mopag meeting would normally be held on the 4th, but that's Labor Day. So it would make sense to move it to the September the 14th. Are we agreed on that, or any discussion needed on that?
Wait a minute. You mean the 11th, September 11th?
September the 11th?
That's the second Saturday.
You're right, the 11th. The following Saturday would be the 11th. Okay, well, let's plan on that to avoid Labor Day. And we probably ought to have another board meeting sometime soon to look at what we're doing in September. I don't recall offhand if we had anyone or any topic assigned to September, but we'll discuss that in a board meeting later on. Okay. Other topics. Does anyone happen to know whether that community college proposition on the ballot in the election held recently, did that pass or not?
Yeah. Passed.
Pass.
It's 4%.
The heck was that?
Somebody's got some really interesting sound effects going on there.
Someone's vacuuming, that's it.
One other thing, I noticed the city is going to release about $168 million of the COVID funds. There was an agreement made among Jones and Green and Reed in the city. So that's a positive, right, Susan?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, I'm just hoping it holds. I hadn't heard that yet, so I'm thanks for the news.
Yeah, that was in the Post-Dispatch, I believe. Also, I don't know how much you were following this, but more and more has come out about Trump and how he was basically trying to overthrow our government. So it's I can't say I'm shocked. It's just hadn't come out before, his dealings with the Department of Justice in particular. The infrastructure bill that they're working on, about $500 billion, unfortunately, climate change is largely unaddressed in that bill. And I think that's about all I wanted to mention. Does anyone have any other final thoughts or topics? Don?
Yeah, unfortunately, I won't be able to make, I'm not going to be at the dinner tonight, and I won't be able to make the gathering on the 14th because I have a healthcare gathering.
On the 11th, on the 11th.
Oh, I thought there was a,
Well,
August 14th.
Oh, 14th of this month?
yes,
Yeah.
that's
would
the
be-
Love Park meeting,
Oh, that one.
the Democrat Love Fest, okay?
Yeah.
Right, on August 14th.
So
Okay.
I'm gonna, in today's conversation, I think echoes this. I would hope that as a party, we can come to a consensus on some of these major issues like school choice, like universal health care. Okay. And if Ed were here, Ed Weisbart, we'd have a nice conversation because we've had more pleasant conversations lately. There's a difference between single payer and universal. Okay. But we need to iron out those issues so it's harder for them to lie about us when we get to the general election. And we got a lot of cleanup to work to do on both our positions and policy. And one other thing is, even if we win on Medicaid expansion, that still doesn't address the dysfunction and the institutional racism that is deeply seated in Missouri's healthcare system.
The other thing that's been going on, headwind against Democrats, is Mitch McConnell's been able to use the filibuster to thwart our programs, at least since 2009, and is doing that again, and leads to failure for the Democrats in charge, which shows up in midterms. And that's why it's so important that at least some sort of carve out for the filibuster is made for, well, for the HR 1, for the PEOPLE Act is critical, absolutely critical. And that's in a critical situation right now over the next 2 weeks. When the Dems try and get that passed. That's a biggie. If that filibuster is not changed in some respect, at least if not eliminated, which I don't expect, I don't think most people do, but at least modified in some form that we can get a a majority vote to win on some of these issues. It's going to be my continued minority rule. And in some cases, you basically have 20, 30% of the country dictating to the rest of the country and saying no to things that are popular with the people of this country, whether it's gun control or many other issues. So we've got ourselves in a real bind if we don't get Democrats to support some change to the filibuster. Okay, anything else? If not, I could take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
I'll second it.